a period of time, and that is gun violence, wanton gun violence. What we need to do is to say, as American voters, we're going to the polls to elect women and men who have a sense of responsibility to change this once and for all, to take away these gun threats which all of us have to witness, no matter where you go, supermarket, church, synagogue, classroom, wherever you go, you are vulnerable. Parents are becoming increasingly adamant about the fact that they want their children safe in school, for example, something we used to assume in the past just came with part of being an American. Now it's something that we have to fight for, and we are fighting for it. I thank On Call for Kids for gathering in Washington today. I hear you. I'll do everything in my power to move this issue forward as quickly as possible. So thank you for your credibility and your professionalism that brings you to this moment. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator Durbin. I've got to lower the mic now for myself. Hi, everyone. I'm Emily Lieberman. My husband and I are both Dr. Lieberman at work. As a pediatrician, every day, I'm on call for kids at my clinic. But today we stand before America in front of our nation's capital because being on call for kids at work is no longer enough. Now we are on call for kids in every aspect of our lives. After July 4th of 2022, I realized that even I, a pediatrician by training, do not have the power to keep my children safe. On that day, the most patriotic day of the year, our family attended the Highland Park Independence Day Parade. Floats passed, children collected candy in the streets, and then 14 minutes later, 83 high-velocity bullets rained down on my community. My husband and older daughter started running, and by the time I grabbed my younger daughter, I was caught in the stampede of people trying to escape. I ended up sheltering in a single-occupancy bathroom within a local store. We had 17 total people in that tiny little bathroom with adult bodies covering our children while we sat in darkness and silence for hours. Instead of kids with flags and candy, our town was littered with the blood of our neighbors, human bodies, and shreds of vital organs. My family was lucky that day. We were all physically unharmed, but our lives were forever changed. And now, for my children, and for all of your children, I have been on call for kids every day since. And I'm not alone, because here before you, we have a coalition of physicians and healthcare workers, medical professionals from across the country who are dedicated to addressing this public health crisis of gun violence. We are grateful to our elected officials for passing the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act. Incremental progress is still progress. However, death rates from firearms continue to climb. Children are dying from firearms daily at increasing rates, and those who survive, their families, their communities, are left irrevocably changed. Military weapons should not be for the streets of America. They should be for the battlefield. Background checks should be universal. People with guns should be required to store them safely so that a child doesn't mistake a weapon for a toy. Today, over 80 medical professionals are spending the day on Capitol Hill to provide our lawmakers, officials who we elect to office, officials who should be accountable to us, with research and data to save our children's lives. The facts are clear. Gun safety legislation will save lives. It will help my family and yours to know that once again, it is okay to walk to school, to shop at your local grocery store, or even to attend an Independence Day parade. Is that too much to ask?
Thank you. Thank you, Emily. I stand before you today as a father and surgeon alongside my wife, a pediatrician and organizer, as well as this incredible group of advocates on Call for Kids, because it should never be too much to ask our elected officials to keep our families and our communities safe. We have a history in America of protecting children. For centuries, the leading cause of death in children was communicable illness. We addressed infectious disease through sanitation processes, hand washing, vaccines, and more. Then, in the middle of the 20th century, motor vehicle accidents became the leading cause of death in children. So we enacted seatbelt laws. Now, since 2020, for the first time in the history of our great country, firearms are the leading cause of death in children. Think about it this way. If your child dies in this country, the most likely reason will not be a drowning accident, it won't be a car crash, and not even cancer. It's a bullet. Here is some published data to digest. Every 3 days, enough children to fill an entire school bus die from firearm injuries. Nearly 75% of firearms used in unintentional shootings are left unlocked and fully loaded. And 75% of school shooters get their weapons from a parent or a close relative. In states where universal background checks are required for all purchases, childhood mortality due to firearms is reduced by over 1/3. During the years of the federal assault weapons ban, from 1994 to 2004, mass shooting-related homicides were reduced, and fatalities from mass shootings were 70% less likely to occur. The Bipartisan Safer Communities Act was the most important law to address gun safety in our country in the past 30 years, but it must be just the first step. Kids are dying every single day, and those who live in poverty or are in historically marginalized communities are dying at a much higher rate than their peers. Black children are more than 10 times likely to die by firearm homicide, and Alaska Native and American Indian children are more than 3 times likely to die by suicide. We need a safe storage law to keep our children safe from weapons in their own homes. We need universal background checks to help keep dangerous weapons out of the hands of dangerous people. And we need a law to keep military weapons off our streets. Together, it is our Hippocratic oath to prevent harm. We are carrying out that oath by advocating for gun safety, and we are carrying out that oath as On Call for Kids today and every day.
It's my pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Dr. Ashley Jaffe. She's an associate professor and pediatric rehabilitation medicine physician based in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. As a pediatric physiatrist, she has dedicated her professional career to providing care for children with physical disabilities. She commonly cared for children with morbidity from firearms, including traumatic brain injuries and spinal cord injuries. However, her narrative took a profound turn on July 4th of 2022 when she herself became a victim of gun violence. Today, she will candidly share her journey from physician caretaker to patient and survivor.
Good afternoon, and thank you for being here. My name is Dr. Ashley Jaffe, and I work as a pediatric rehabilitation medicine physician in Philadelphia. As a physiatrist, I witnessed firsthand what the statistics often fail to capture, the morbidity of gun violence. We must acknowledge those who lived and whose lives are forever changed. It's not just the deaths we must remember. I've been at the bedside helping families understand the devastation caused by firearms. I've seen unintentional shootings cause traumatic brain and spinal cord injuries. The child who will never walk again because a sibling found an unsecured gun in their house and accidentally shot him. the teenager who tried to end their life with a gunshot to the head and lost the ability to communicate or eat and requires around-the-clock care for life. A single bullet can permanently impact a child's function, altering the entire trajectory of that child's life and tearing apart their family as they grieve. As challenging as it is to witness my patients' families cope after firearm injuries, there has been no greater challenge in my life than the struggle I have gone through during the last 22 months after I became a victim of gun violence myself. On July 4th, 2022, I brought my family to a community parade in Highland Park, Illinois, to celebrate a return to normalcy after the isolation of the pandemic. Excruciating pain and blood dripping from my palm was the first clue that something was gravely wrong. "I've been hit. Get down," I screamed with uncertainty as my brain scrambled to process what was happening. The celebration had turned into a war zone. As gunshots blazed overhead, the gravity of the situation was sinking in. Something had grazed my elbow and sliced open my palm. My 5-year-old son had noticed my watch was shot off my wrist, and he was walking into the onslaught of gunfire to retrieve it for me. "Mommy, your watch!" he cried. I dove for him and shoved him underneath the bench we were sitting on, wrapping my body around his small frame as he shrieked in terror at the blood dripping from my hand onto the sidewalk. We were at the epicenter of the carnage, and those sitting in front of and next to us were killed that day. The screaming and bullets abruptly stopped. It was eerily quiet. When we stood up and looked around, the street corner was practically empty. We saw pools of blood. Bystanders were performing chest compressions and holding pressure on spurting wounds. I locked eyes with my husband and urged him to take our son away to safety. We didn't know whose blood was smeared on his face and clothes. In spite of my struggle to hold pressure on my wrist to control my own bleeding, I felt compelled to stay back and help the wounded. Abruptly, the unending danger of the situation truly sunk in when storming SWAT teams' radios were blaring, "Shooter not apprehended, shooter not apprehended, clear the scene." My friend came out of nowhere to escort me from danger into the hospital. I was shot by an assault rifle that sprayed 83 bullets into a crowded suburban street in less than 1 minute. It is incomprehensible how much destruction one weapon can do in so little time. In the aftermath of the shooting, my then 5-year-old son asked, "Is this always what parades are like?" The ripple effects of 60 seconds of gunfire are far-reaching and long-lasting. Gun violence takes a toll on families, physically, financially, emotionally. That day changed our entire lives, and my injuries have kept me from being able to return to take care of my patients. Stitches and months of rehab could not change the permanent neurologic injury I sustained. It is unlikely that I'll ever be able to do my job again as a result of my injuries. In kindergarten last year, my son was upset that they weren't doing active intruder drills correctly. "Bullets can go through drywall. We should hide behind bricks instead," he told us. That's what we did at the parade. As my son ages, his questions have become more sophisticated. When he heard that there used to be an assault rifle ban in this country, he asked, how could anyone let that law disappear? And so, America, I ask you that same question. Why have we allowed it to disappear? Why do we continue to live like this? Why do we subject our children to active shooter drills at school when they should feel safe to learn in their classrooms, not hide in them? I remember safety drills in school for fires and tornadoes. I never had to stay quiet, huddled under a desk, pretending someone was outside my classroom trying to kill me. We can do better. I am here today and will continue showing up until I can tell him that the adults in this country are doing everything they can to make this world safer for him than it is right now. Firearm injuries are the leading cause of death for children in this country, which is shameful. I'd like to believe that this is the only time my family would be shot at with a weapon that no civilian should ever be able to purchase. However, with escalating gun violence of this magnitude and without an assault weapon ban or background checks or safe gun storage, I live in constant fear for our safety. While the size of my wound was small, the trauma I experienced was enormous. Gun violence is a public health crisis that affects communities across this country. Evidence-based and common sense laws can make a difference to protect our children and our communities. It is not only possible, but probable that my family will be impacted by gun violence again in the future unless something changes. July 4th needs to be my son's only mass shooting, not his first. I implore our lawmakers to pass common sense gun laws now.
Thank you for that very heartfelt speech. I'd now like to introduce Dr. Nicole King. She's a critical care anesthesiologist who works in Cincinnati, Ohio. She's originally from Kansas City, Missouri, and currently lives in Kentucky. She completed medical training at the Naval Medical Center in San Diego, and she then spent 10 years in the U.S. Navy. She was honorably discharged as lieutenant commander. She joins us today to share her veteran's perspective on the gun violence epidemic in America.
Good afternoon. As stated, my name is Nicole King, and I am a critical care anesthesiologist in Cincinnati, Ohio. Originally from Kansas City, Missouri, I was motivated and honored to commission in the Navy as a medical student to uphold and defend the freedom and opportunity I was given by those who came before me. Serving others as both a physician and a naval officer was the biggest honor of my life. The people, the camaraderie, the dedication to the mission, the promise that the person next to you would do as much for you as you would do for them, created a community of support and dedication unknown by many civilians. At the same time, the pain of loss, both in battle and at home, was a burden to carry. And many of us carry the wounds today, whether visible or not. I served from 2008 to 2018 and received Wounded Warriors as a trainee and attending physician in San Diego. One of the reasons I was lucky enough to care for men and women who had sustained injuries in a war zone was because of the training and expertise of medical personnel who understood the damage done by weapons of war. Weapons meant to kill. Weapons designed, sold, and carried by military forces across the globe to kill humans as quickly as possible. These same weapons are now rebranded and sold to civilians who think carrying a weapon of war implies and bolsters their facade of service. But there is nothing heroic about the use of these weapons specifically to slaughter and maim adults and children. Americans who are attempting to enjoy the freedom and opportunity we promise them by putting on our uniform. They deserve better. They deserve to live in a country that regulates semi-automatic assault weapons. We can do better. Additionally, I understand the importance of gun ownership to many, including my own family. The foundation of this right is deeply held by many, and I am not ignorant to the historical precedent and inherent need to protect oneself in the face of tyranny as a reason to defend a right to gun ownership. Yet the veterans and active duty service members who spend time on military bases across the country are held to strict rules and regulations on the possession and use of personal weapons, to include mandatory background checks. These same regulations are not only absent, but openly rejected by many states. Those who are disciplined enough and trained well enough to carry a weapon as a member of the U.S. military are not given, without proper permission and regulations, the right to bear arms, even in their own homes, if they reside in base-owned housing. Yet untrained, unskilled, and unregulated civilians are allowed gun ownership with little to no restriction depending on the state in which they reside. Rejecting point-of-contact regulations to ensure state-run background checks, as well as allowing for the purchase of weapons via private and online sales without a need for a background check, has allowed for the constant flow of weapons into our interstate gun trade. As these weapons are distributed across the country, we are left with a constant threat and fear of firearm-related injuries. This is the reason we call on Congress to bring universal background checks to the floor. This is a nonpartisan issue. No one is calling for anything other than common sense gun laws that most American citizens, including gun owners, agree with. It's time for us to take back our freedom to live without fear.
Thank you, Dr. King. We'd now like to introduce Dr. Sophia Chowdhury. She's a pediatric emergency medicine physician and assistant professor in Atlanta, Georgia. She's also a co-chair for the Violence Prevention Task Force for the Pediatric Injury Prevention Research Center at her institution. She completed a Health Policy Scholars Fellowship program through the Academic Pediatric Association. Dr. Chowdhury has co-authored multiple publications on the impact of firearm injuries on children and teens, including not only financial costs and physical health, but also mental health and disparities in access to continued care.
Good afternoon. My name is Dr. Sophia Chowdhury. I'm a pediatric emergency medicine physician in Atlanta, Georgia, a firearm injury prevention researcher, and a mother of 3 young children. As an emergency medicine physician, I have cared for multiple children with gunshot wounds. I have witnessed firsthand the devastation that occurs when a child needlessly gains access to an unsecured firearm. I remember a 2-year-old boy shot in the chest by his 6-year-old brother who had found a loaded, unlocked gun in their parents' bedroom drawer. A 1-month-old baby girl with brain matter pouring out from a bullet wound. She was unintentionally shot by her 3-year-old cousin using a loaded gun he found tucked behind a sofa cushion. A 15-year-old boy who pointed a family gun to his chest while showing it to his friends and thinking it unloaded, pulled the trigger. These patients haunt me. Their needless, senseless loss haunts me. The piercing cries of their parents haunt me. Despite my years of rigorous medical training and working with highly skilled trauma teams, we could not save these children. These deaths were all completely preventable with secure storage. Gun violence is a public health crisis that kills more children, adolescents, and young adults than anything else in the United States, including car crashes and cancer. Many of these deaths and injuries that occur are due to children accessing guns that were unsafely stored. 2023 was the worst year for unintentional shootings by children in the U.S., a record high of over 400 children unintentionally shooting someone else, most often another child. Passing Ethan's Law, a federal safe storage law that requires guns to be locked and stored separate from ammunition, will prevent many of these deaths. The bipartisan Safer Communities Act passed after the tragedy in Uvalde and was the first federal firearm legislation for firearm safety in decades. This law has improved needed access to mental health services and promoted school programming for violence intervention programs. The successes show that federal legislation works. However, despite this landmark legislation, we still have thousands of kids dying from guns every year and many more injured, with minoritized youth and historically marginalized communities being disproportionately killed and injured by guns. For every child that dies from a firearm injury, there are at least 4 or more that are injured. Bullets can damage any organ. They can sever spinal cords, causing paralysis and the need for lifelong care. They can go through the intestines, causing lifelong issues with feeding, growth, and digestion. Many of these children have frequent healthcare visits and hospitalizations, incurring enormous medical costs. These kids are robbed from their childhoods. Most gun owners with children own firearms to protect their families, and I want to protect families too. The best way to protect a child from a firearm is to prevent them from having access to it. This is something that is not controversial. Most parents believe that their child cannot access their guns, but we know that 1 in 3 teens can access a loaded firearm in under 5 minutes. In a time when we have a concurrent mental health crisis It is imperative to continue to protect our kids. Suicide by firearm is 90% fatal, and most youth who think about suicide act upon it in less than an hour. It is impulsive. If they use a gun, they do not get a second chance. Locking up guns is one way to give kids that second chance. Caring for a child after being shot is too late. We know that by having common sense safe storage laws, we can keep our children safe. In states with no safe storage laws, kids die at a rate twice as those with the strongest laws. Imagine how many lives we could save if the entire country was held to those high standards. It is time for Congress to use its tools to protect the safety of our children. I use tools every day in my job. We use tools to care for children impacted by gunshot wounds, to help them heal, to help them walk again. The best way to treat a gunshot wound is to prevent it from happening, and that is through having strong safe storage laws. I often hear from parents the same question: did you do everything you could to save my child? And I can tell you that being here today helps me say yes, because saving your child is not just medically treating them, but also standing here and asking for action. I am asking you the same question that I am asked. Did you do everything you could to save and protect America's children? Thank you.
We are currently waiting for Senator Murphy, who should hopefully be here within the next 5 minutes.
If anyone had questions that they wanted to ask of any of our speakers while we're waiting for Senator Murphy, please feel free to ask. Yeah.
What do you see as the solution as would have a measurable impact on our communities that could actually be fixed?
I think that at this time there are a couple solutions that could actually happen. I want to start with a shout out to Senator Heinrich's outstanding new bill, the Go Safe Act. That really has some bipartisan potential, specifically because of the buyback program and the focus on the firearm itself and the mechanisms. I think that if we could gain more co-sponsorship there could be a lot of bipartisan potential to save lives. Because as we've shown you today, even from a veteran's perspective, these weapons of war do not belong on the streets of civilians, and physicians cannot cure the wounds inflicted by these injuries. I would also say that for secure storage, that is also something that our government should be able to pass. In addition to background checks, it's really important that everyone understands that all three bills are things that most Americans want. Whether you're a gun owner or not, most Americans want all three of these passed. So it's only in these walls that this becomes political. It's not for most Americans. And while we want all three bills passed more than anything, my personal plight also is to get weapons of war out of the hand of civilians. And at this time, I'll have my husband.
It is now a privilege to introduce our final speaker. Senator Chris Murphy is the junior United States Senator from Connecticut. The Sandy Hook Elementary School shooting occurred within the senator's House district at the end of his term after winning the 2012 United States Senate election. In the aftermath of the shooting and nearly every day since the tragedy, he has dedicated his career to gun safety legislation. His tireless work has resulted in the end of the ban on gun violence research at the CDC and the successful negotiation of the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act. With great admiration, Senator Chris Murphy.
Well, it sounded like you might have been vamping a little bit there to wait for me to arrive. I appreciate it. That's a very important skill in our business. Listen, thank you so much to all of the providers who are here today. Thanks for the tremendous work that On Call for Kids does to stand up for our children. We should not accept a country where the leading cause of death is preventative violence. You all just have a moral authority because of the profession in which you work, because of the high esteem that medical professionals are held in, that we don't have as political figures, as elected members of Congress. And so there's not a coincidence that our movement has grown and seen more success over the last 10 years as physicians and nurses and other providers have decided to stand up and speak on behalf of your patients. And so thank you for your focus on these specific pieces of legislation. But thanks for what you do to really make people understand the full scope of this epidemic. It's unacceptable that 110 people die in this country every day. It's unacceptable that a percentage of those are children. But I live in one of the more violence-prone neighborhoods in Connecticut. I live just south of downtown on the edge of the south end of Hartford. And I hear the sirens whizzing by my house every night. I live just a stone's throw away from Hartford Hospital, a trauma center that's taking care of these gunshot wound victims. And so I know exactly what's going on every night in my neighborhood. I have a group of kids, a group of middle school students who are kind of like my neighborhood kitchen cabinet. And so I meet with these kids as often as I can. I try to do it every month. I tend to probably get to them every 6 weeks. And we sit down at their school, their middle school, it's right down the street from me, and we just talk about what they care about. And I always remind people that those kids in the south end of Hartford view school as the safe place, right? We have this image of kids being most at risk when they're in a school. But for kids who grow up in neighborhoods with high rates of violence, the school is the safe place. It's outside the school that they worry about. You drive around my neighborhood on a weekday afternoon, statistically, I know there are thousands of kids in my neighborhood, but you don't see them because their parents or their caretakers tell them when school is over, you walk straight home, you go inside, and you lock the door until I come home. And maybe when I come home, we'll go out together. We are losing a generation of children in this country to the trauma of gun violence as they experience it, even though they never get shot. Because the fear that they have to live with every day is literally corrupting these kids' brains, making it unable for them to learn. The first time I sat down with these kids, the first thing they wanted to talk to me about was the walk to and from school and how scared they were every single day. How do we accept that as the most powerful, most affluent nation in the world? That there are millions of children in this country who fear for their life, not just in school, but walking to and from school. How do we live with ourselves when we know what to do to change that reality? It's no mystery. This isn't trying to invent a perpetual motion machine, right? We know the inputs in order to get the outputs. Get the assault weapons off the streets. Universal background checks. Requiring the safe storage of firearms. You do those three things and you will see a different reality for our kids. I'm going to leave you with this. I know that to be true because we've tested that proposition. With your help, 2 years ago, almost to the day, we passed the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act, the first significant anti-gun violence bill in 30 years. 30 years, the gun industry owned that building, and because of you and many others, you took it back. So today we have the chance to pass legislation that saves people's lives. 2 years ago, we passed the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act. My neighborhood is still a violent place. But in the first year after we passed that bill, urban gun violence rates dropped 12%, the biggest drop, one-year drop in the history of the country. It is soon to not be the biggest one-year drop in the history of the country because we are on pace for a 20% reduction from 2023 to 2024. Now, when you start with 110 people dying every day of gunshot wounds, right, that's not anything to celebrate, right, because we're just down to 80 or 90. But it's proof of concept. When you change the laws of this country and you make it a little bit harder for people who are irresponsible to get guns, when you start to take those assault weapons off the streets, you get immediate returns. There are thousands of young men primarily, young black men primarily, who are alive today who wouldn't have been if we hadn't organized and passed that critical legislation. Nothing worth fighting for in this world is easy. No political movement that you read about in the history books succeeded the first or the second or the third or the fourth time. The only successful political change movements that make the history books are those that were so convinced of the righteousness of their cause that they did not let failure after failure dissuade them, that they knew that they were right, they knew that people would come around, they didn't accept anything except for total victory. When it comes to the health and safety of our kids, that is the line that we draw in the sand. Thank you to all of you for being here to make this reality a safer, more loving country with safe communities, with safe schools, with safe commutes to school for our kids a reality. Thanks for letting me join you here today.
Thank you all for being here today. Thank you to our distinguished speakers and senators. We hope we've imparted upon you the understanding that things can be done to save lives of children in our country. And we ask America, as we head into voting season, to please remember this as we make our votes, because we must vote to save our children. Thank you.